The Michael Penix Jr. era has officially begun in Atlanta, and I think it is going to be a major success for the Falcons. Now, we all know the crazy offseason that Atlanta had at the quarterback position. They first of all went out and signed Kirk Cousins, who's formerly with the Vikings, to a 4-year, $180 million contract. Now, coming into this year, people were super excited in Atlanta because you have Kirk Cousins, arguably a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, being paired up with these young explosive weapons that they have in Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, and Drake London. And you have this new regime that's being taken over by Raheem Morris, who had been such a successful defensive coordinator in the NFL. And people looked at that and were super fired up about this Atlanta team, specifically because they were in a weak conference. They thought that this would be an easy path for them to get to the postseason, potentially win 10 or 11 games, and this Kirk Cousins era would be off to a bang. But Atlanta would surprise everybody in the first round of the draft, taking Michael Penix with their 8th overall pick in a massive shock. Nobody saw this coming. He was one of the best quarterbacks in the entire nation last year. He led Washington all the way to the national championship. This Huskies offense was one of the best in the entire country, and it was orchestrated by Michael Penix Jr. But of course, you have a quarterback that's being paid $180 million, and you now have his eventual successor that they drafted in the first round of the draft. A lot of people were very surprised. Not only that, you looked at Kirk Cousins and you looked at his age at 37 years old. You would assume that he would probably ride out the end of his contract with the Falcons, and then they would switch over to another younger quarterback. But Michael Penix Jr. played 6 years of college football, and he's already 24 years old. So by the time Cousins would end his eventual contract with the Falcons, that would put Michael Penix at 28 years old. And naturally, this had a lot of people confused, but we saw Atlanta get out to a hot start. They were 4-2. This offense looked really good. Kirk Cousins set the most passing yards in Falcons history, and all was going well until they would hit this rough patch starting 5 weeks ago, where they would go on a 4-game losing skid. Kirk Cousins would have an awful touchdown to interception ratio, where he went a 4-week stretch of 0 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. And this last week was the final cherry on top. This team had dropped all the way down to 6-7. They let Tampa Bay take the division lead, and they have the tiebreaker, but they let Tampa Bay take the division lead. In this final game against Las Vegas, yes, they were able to win it, but the offense looked abysmal. Kirk Cousins only threw for 112 yards. They only put up 15 points. They only had the 1 touchdown in the first quarter. And besides that, they were just kicking field goals. The offense looked really lackluster. And this is finally what led Raheem Morris to make this decision for Michael Penix Jr. to become the starting quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons. And I absolutely love this decision. Now, a lot of people were questioning why Atlanta would draft Penix, that he was 24 years old. You typically want to draft a guy that's 21 or 22 that can sit behind a guy for 1 or 2 years. But with Penix, this absolutely wasn't the case, and we already see him inserted into the starting lineup at 24 years old, 14 weeks into the season. And we've seen so many great quarterbacks in the NFL that have sat and wait their turn for their opportunity. We look at Patrick Mahomes sitting behind Alex Smith for a season, and then right after that, winning the MVP the next year, and he's arguably one of the best quarterbacks of all time already. We look at Jordan Love and what Green Bay has done with their 3 different quarterbacks, from Aaron Rodgers learning behind Brett Favre, and then Jordan Love learning behind Aaron Rodgers. And all 3 of those quarterbacks in Green Bay have been hits. And we've seen that become a modern day blueprint with a lot of young quarterbacks that are pretty raw coming out of college. He was one of the best quarterbacks in the nation last year, absolutely lit it up. He had this cannon of an arm, this lefty gunslinger, could make any throw on the field, had decent mobility, and that's what excited a lot of people about Penix, because when you looked at his statistics the last 2 seasons at Washington, in his second to last year of college football, he threw for 4,600 passing yards and 31 touchdowns to only 8 picks. And then his final year at Washington, he had almost 5,000 passing yards and 36 touchdowns, leading the nation's top offense. And we saw this 5-week slide for the Falcons where it's like, okay, you lose 4 straight games, you're 6-7. If you lose to the Raiders, it's no question that you have to give Penix a shot, but they were lucky enough to win this game and move to 7-7, and that's why they feel they need to make this move now, because they're still in the playoff race. They're still easily in the division race. They're 2-0 against Tampa Bay, so all they have to do is win out and hope that Tampa Bay can lose 1 game. And you look at the schedule for Atlanta, I think it's pretty favorable. They're going to have New York at home. We're going to assume they win that one. They're 8.5-point favorites. The only tough game they're going to have is Sunday Night Football next week, going on the road at Washington, which I absolutely think is a winnable game. And then they'll finish it off playing Carolina at at home. So you can assume that Atlanta is probably going to be the favorite in all 3 of those games. And then you look at the Buccaneers. Can they drop one of these last 3 games? On the road against the Cowboys, at home against the Panthers, and then at home against the Saints. Their schedule also looks really simple. But I think for Atlanta, you need to get a gauge of where this team is at right now. And if they can win out, they still have a chance in this division. And I think that's why they ultimately went to Michael Penix. This offense has looked abysmal over the last few weeks, and we know what type of talent they have. Bijan Robinson, one of the best running backs in the entire NFL. Kyle Pitts, he hasn't necessarily had that success that everyone expected from him when he was drafted 4th overall, but we know he's mega talented. And then you look at Drake London. He's had his best season of his entire career, and he looks like a true #1 dominant receiver. And I think right now for Atlanta, there's a few different ways that they can go with Kirk Cousins in the future. We know that he's being paid $180 million over 4 years, and you're going to have some sort of massive cap hit that's going to take place if they were to cut him at the end of this year. Or do they want to trade him to another team that might want to use Cousins as a potential bridge quarterback for another young rookie QB? But regardless, 5 straight bad weeks from Cousins in this offense. It's go time for Penix, and I think he is one of the most talented quarterbacks in this rookie class, if not the most talented. He is a gunslinger. He can make any throw on the football field. You look at what he was doing with those deep shots that he was taking in Washington. It fired up so many people. One of the major knocks on Penix was his off-speed throws. He only seemed to throw it at 100%, whether it was a slant, a 5-yard in, whatever you were looking at from him. So I'm excited to see how he's evolved as a passer and what he's learned through these first 14 weeks of the season. But regardless, that's basically a full year where Penix has learned under Kirk Cousins. He understands this offense. We've seen the clips of him on the sideline shaking his head. He's ready to go. And I think Michael Penix Jr. is going to have all the confidence in the world. They're going to beat down on New York bad. And I think you can expect Atlanta to go on the road and beat Washington. And I think this Falcons team is super legit with Michael Penix Jr. as their new quarterback. I'm all in on the Penix train, so make sure you buckle your seatbelt and get on the ride before he absolutely takes off. I'm Caden Kubler, and thanks for watching.